Good evening. Okay, this is going to be a very interesting post for me. I'm kind of diverging. This is both a news article and also a bit of a tribute. So first of all, I want to acknowledge my collaborator and a great source of information for this particular video, Master Jose Gonzalez of the Trenton-Hamilton region. Those of you who have been watching these videos might know, but for those of you that haven't, Master Gonzalez actually is sort of a long-lost martial arts relative of mine, okay? And I'm going to talk about someone who's an even more long-lost martial art relative of mine. I grew up in Hamilton and Trenton, New Jersey. In that region, Trenton is basically the capital of New Jersey, and Hamilton is more of a suburban region, okay? But if you've been to New Jersey, you know that some of our suburbs are more populated than a city. So one of my instructors in high school was Jeff Mack, Shihan Jeff Mack, who retired from teaching a long time ago. I believe he's in the barbershop business. But at one point he was running a full-time karate school, and before that, through my high school years, he was actually building his student base. All right. Turns out that he got his start in a martial art club in his high school, Steinert High School. I went to Nottingham. Nottingham and Steinert were rivals, especially in football and wrestling and things like that. And Jose Gonzalez and another fellow, the late Craig DeVries, started and ran that club. And Craig DeVries was a martial artist that I met 3 times. He was an incredibly dynamic individual, a fantastic, fabulous kicker. Could kick you all day. You know, picture a combination of Wonderboy Thomas, Bill Wallace. Could do side-facing kicks, front kicks, crescent kicks. Hit you all day with them. Could knock you out with them, but had really good control. So, growing up in Hamilton and Trenton, I started out in karate. I did a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but karate was my main thing. I left to go into the service in the Marine Corps. I got a black belt in Taekwondo. And at one point, I was also an honorary black belt in Shito Ryu. I started at a Shito Ryu place, and they let me wear my black belt and work out as a black belt. Then when I got out, I really got into Kung Fu, and I fell in love with Kung Fu. And also Kali and Silat, Filipino and Indonesian martial arts, which are very Kung Fu-like. But let me have some tea here because my throat's a little raspy. It's a little dry in here, so excuse me for a second. As I was training in Kung Fu, a lot of the student body was black. And sometimes outside of class, I'd go over to someone's house, go to the hood, and we'd train in their living room. Sometimes the porch, basement, whatever. And we had a good old time. And sometimes there'd be friends and relatives, you know, of my host there. And a name just kept coming up. Carter Preston. Carter Preston. Carter Preston. I remember at one occasion we were visiting my friend Joe's house, and there was an older man, kind of very lean, very skinny, had a baseball cap on, real quiet guy. And he's like, "Oh, you do that karate stuff?" And I'm not doing these accents to make fun of them. I'm really trying to replicate what they sounded like, because if you've actually been to Trenton, New Jersey, you'll know that these are actual accents that are spoken in the urban region. I said, yeah, we do Kung Fu. Well, you should have seen Carter Preston. That was a bad motherfucker. Okay, the name keeps popping up. Another time, we're at another friend's house, and we're working out in the living room, and then, you know, someone comes in the house and, you're doing that karate stuff. Nobody knows the difference between karate and Kung Fu, right? So he's like, well, you know, you probably all right, but you should have seen Carter Preston, man. Couldn't nobody fuck with that guy. So, okay. So who is he? Well, let me break it down for you, because this is a figure that is very important in the history of martial arts in Hamilton, Trenton, New Jersey, and actually could have been and should have been nationally known. So, and because Master Jose Gonzalez actually trained with this guy in a very substantial way, and he is sort of a distant cousin or uncle of mine, okay? It's sort of like doing a 23andMe and finding out you have something different in your ancestry you never suspected, and that you may be connected to like an ex-president or something, okay? So let's start with, I have two pairs of notes. I have handwritten notes that I've been researching from different sources, and I'll be referring to them. So the full name is Preston F Carter, okay? And he got his martial arts training in the Marine Corps sometime in the late 50s, early 60s. He was a Marine. He was stationed overseas. And I have some names here. So he trained overseas under a sensei Nishida. Now, I did some research and I tried to look up Shotokan senseis named Nishida from Japan. And the name that just kept coming up was actually a very important figure in the evolution of Shotokai, because at one point there was a top karate master under Gichin Funakoshi named Shigeru Igami, and he split away from Shotokan and formed Shotokai. And they're more like philosophical organization, and they're more based on what we like to call internal principles or soft style principles, basically finesse and technique over power and speed, okay? And Nishida was actually his right-hand man. So I don't know if the Nishida he trained with overseas is this Nishida. But if it is, what a great person to train under, because I've seen some incredible photographs of him kicking. There's one picture of this particular Nishida, Igami's right-hand man, doing a jumping split where he's doing a jumping toe touch, and the balls of his feet are basically even with his ears and eyebrows, okay? So he's in a pike and his extremely flexed. There's another picture of him throwing a high front kick where the hips are pivoted. The hips are pivoted to a great degree, as if he was doing a roundhouse kick, but he's doing a front kick. So, and he was also, there's also photographs of him demonstrating kicks, high kicks, while kneeling. So, I would say that if that's the Nishida he trained with, he got fairly high level instruction, and realized that in the 60s, late 50s, early 60s, Shotokan was incredibly focused on quality, not quantity. Actually, to this day, Shotokan is not really a commercialized style. It hasn't really gone the way of the Black Belt Factory and the McDojo. Then it said, according to the sources, when he came back to the United States, he trained under a different sensei, Miyamoto sensei, and around 1960 or 61, he got his black belt and he started teaching in Trenton, particularly West Trenton, which is a rough area. He quickly established a reputation as a fighter and competitor. There are some pictures of him on the internet doing breaking, board breaking, brick breaking, the standard stuff. But he was also a fighter. It seems that everybody was scared of him. The gangbangers were scared of him. The cops were scared of him. The other martial artists were scared of him. Part of that could have been his physique. The picture I saw of him, he did not look like he was carrying around much spare fat at all. Okay? He had a very thick, dense musculature. And he was over 6 foot tall, and his weight, they said it was at least 275 pounds. He may have been closer to 300, and it was a very solid weight. Think an NFL linebacker. So contrary to what you might think, excuse me, contrary to what you might think, everyone that knew him said he was very fast and very explosive. So that's a dangerous combination. Just being hit by someone that weighs 275 pounds, who's okay, is a dicey proposition. Okay, you can get injured permanently by a very unskilled 275-pound person whacking you. All right, if that person is trained overseas in Japan in what we often call the blood and guts era, deadlier still. And if he's fast and skilled, very deadly. So I can see why that he had a reputation as a fighter and how many people in Trenton, and Trenton's a rough area, very rough area. We're scared of him. Now, he had some connections you might call shady, because he did security. It's people are 99% secure that he was hired to do security for a pimp called Happy Carmichael, and he often did security for a gentleman's club in Trenton, and that was right across the street from Trenton State Penitentiary. And that's the same area where both cops and gangsters and thugs would frequent. And there was also a bar that was reputedly owned by Pete Lorenzo, basically a mobster's bar. So now, Preston Carter, Shihan Preston Carter, the late Preston Carter, founded his own style called Nippon Kudo Shotokan. So he stayed close to his Shotokan roots. I know that if you go on the internet and you look up Kudo, any type of style that has Kudo on it in Japan or here, they generally stress a lot of fighting, competitive fighting, and fighting with gear on, and sort of a rough and tumble interpretation of karate. All right, and Shotokan is a power-based system, a technique-based system, where even to this day, I mean, as a child, I did Shotokan, and even the children's class, you could do hundreds of repetitions of basic techniques. You could learn a basic form and just do that form for months and months and months. They didn't believe in flooding you with tons of material. They believed in the perfection of basics, the perfection of attributes, development of a spirit, and a boot camp like training environment. So he had two students that stand up in the historical record. His number one assistant was reputed to be Bill Brown, and his top student said to be James Page. And they said at the time he was about 220 pounds. And Master Jose Gonzalez says if you picture from the waist down, he looked like Michael Highwhite and had that skill level. Now, things went bad for him one day. This was around 1970 and 71. Okay, he was called in for a disturbance at that gentleman's club, Reed Topless Club, and there were three individuals there who were creating problems, and he asked them to leave, and he physically evicted them. And back then, 1970, 71, things were very different. Bouncers beat you up. And if you got beat up by a bouncer being booted out of a club for being stupid, the cops weren't that likely to arrest the bouncer. They were basically like, you got what you deserved, and you deserved to be arrested for creating a disturbance. Things are different now. A lot of what you hear in these chronicles, with a modern eye, you might not understand, because it's a completely different world that we live in. For instance, you might say, well, why was he, doing security for this guy? Realize that for a black man, and nobody used the term African American then, for a black man living in Trenton at that time, there were not a lot of options. If you didn't have a college degree, if you didn't have connections, if you were, a working class serviceman coming home with a particular skill set, you did what you had to do to survive. Okay, and I'm going to quote a rap band that you may have heard of called Naughty by Nature. They're also from Trenton, and they say something to the effect of, well, if you ain't never been to the ghetto, then don't talk about the ghetto. All right, because we are talking about the ghetto, and I have been in that ghetto. I have walked through that ghetto. I have been through those streets, and I know people like that. That's one reason why the story of Preston Carter is something that I've always been interested in. So he ejects these people from this establishment, and they come back later armed, and he has to defend himself. Well, he beat two guys up. One guy he hit so hard that it is reputed that the guy's eye detached. Now, before you get upset and say that's bullshit, that's never going to happen, remember, picture I'm an average-sized person and a trained black belt who's quick and explosive, a nationally rated fighter, kicks me in the chest. Okay? Realize that fights, street fights, dangerous confrontations do not occur on the mat. They do not occur in the cage, and they do not occur in the ring with the padded ropes. They occur in the real world. And the real world is full of messy places. The real world is full of corners and concrete, wood, splintered wood, tables, chairs, things like that, benches. Okay? To give you a reference point, there was, when I was training Kung Fu, this was in the late 90s in Trenton and Hamilton with the Shaolin Chuanfa Silam Pai Kwan. There was a street fight in that same region. Someone had gotten a verbal altercation in a bar, and either they were ejected or he said, "See me outside." The two combatants were outside, and one guy sort of sucker punched the other guy in the face. He fell back, and his head hit the corner of a curb, and the guy died. One punch, he died. Okay? And it wasn't so much the punch, but how that punch landed and where that head landed. Okay? And I remember this event because we were being taught that day by an assistant instructor, Sifu John Belinsky. And as part of our warm-up that day, he had us practice break falls and rolls and all this stuff. And we trained on a hard linoleum floor at the JCC, the Jewish Community Center in Ewing. And he said, we don't practice this enough, and we're going to practice it today because of what happened. I want you guys to know to be prepared for these things, okay? And, don't consent to a fight. Walk away from a fight. But if you think a fight's going to happen, be aware. Don't get sucker punched, and know how to fall and roll, okay? So we are not talking about an impossible thing to get kicked so hard by a very big man and your head slams into something, and the trauma, you sustain an eye injury. Okay? Now, unfortunately for Shihan Carter, one of the other thugs, criminals, had brought a gun, and he shot him in the back. As a consequence, he was paralyzed from the waist down. He held on. He continued teaching. He was famous for his breaking demos, and he even continued to do that from his wheelchair. Okay? But many of his students sort of shied away from him. Who knows why? Maybe they feared retaliation. Maybe they feared that there was a mob connection. Maybe they just, people tend to move away from you when you have a period of bad luck. Okay, fact of life. Master Jose Gonzalez said that he had known about Shihan Carter ever since he was about 15 years old, because he was very famous in the local martial arts scene. Let me elaborate on that. Peter Urban used to travel to meet him. Peter Urban was the founder of USA Goju and one of the first Goju karate practitioners in the United States. He had trained directly in Japan with Gogen Yamaguchi. Another person, Don Nagel. Don Nagel taught Isshinryu Karate in Jersey City, and Gary Alexander, who taught in Edison, both Isshinryu black belts, people who introduced Isshinryu to the United States, and who later on became incredibly high-ranking exponents of that art and produced many, many students and black belts. And this was in the day when the average karate black belt that trained overseas in Japan didn't just train karate, but also did judo. And, so they could roll. They actually knew how to deal with throws and falls and ground grappling and chokes and arm bars on the ground. It's a different era. He was a nationally rated fighter until the incident. He held on. He continued to teach. Master Jose Gonzalez said that he used to go over to the man's apartment on West State Street for private lessons, and then immediately afterwards go to the Trenton Pal, with their boxing program. And he did this until Shihan Carter's death. Shihan Carter died alone, 1977, in his own apartment. He is survived by two relatives, Deborah E. Carter, which I think is his niece, and a daughter, Shelley Carter. I don't know if they're still alive today and if they have any descendants, but I do know this. Preston Carter should have been in the martial arts history books. He should be more well known because the number of black Shotokan stylists that I've heard of, with all the reading I've done and all the martial arts encyclopedias and books I've read, only two names come up. George Cofield in New York City and James Field in California. Those are the only two Shotokan sensei that I know. And there was a Shotokan sensei that came after Preston Carter, had already been teaching, Master Katsuya Kisaka, who was an All Japan champion. And, this is going to sound interesting, Chuck Norris's instructor at Osan Air Force Base, when he migrated to the U.S., actually set up in Hamilton, New Jersey, Shin's Karate, before moving his headquarters to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the World Tang Sudo Federation, right? But before that, there was Preston Carter. And there was also the American Karate Institute. And maybe a few others, underground. But if you think of the number, there are only about 12 famous black African-American martial arts personalities. You got names like Steve Muhammad, then known as Steve Sanders. You've got Donnie Williams. You've got Joe Hayes, who is definitely underrepresented in the press. You've got a few others, and there's only about 12 of them. But you don't hear much about Preston Carter, and I think had this incident not happened, you would have heard more about him. He would have been more of a legendary figure. Died in 1977 alone. But I feel like, because now I know his effect on the history of martial arts in Hamilton and Trenton, and about the connection from one of my instructors through his teacher, through that teacher getting private lessons from Shihan Carter, I feel like there is a connection. And so I've tried to do my best to present this. And I'm going to do something that many of my friends say I'm incapable of doing, which is I'm going to have a moment of silence. So I dedicate this video to Preston Carter's surviving family and to the Trenton martial artists that had some kind of connection to him. And, because of the salty language I've used, and because of some of the things that I've said, I can't monetize this video, and many of my videos on YouTube can't be monetized. So if you want to support me in any way, contact me. I will take any kind of help or financial support through PayPal or whatever. But if you knew Preston Carter, if I missed something, if I got something wrong, don't get angry. Just let me know. Show me what your sources are. Show me where the verification is. And I'll produce another video adding the corrections. Okay? Thank you all very much, and you have a wonderful night. And Thanksgiving is coming up, so enjoy your Thanksgiving holiday.